It wasn't supposed to be a night for anything. I'd finished work, brushed off plans with friends, and was planning to spend the night doing nothing but scrolling on my phone and sinking into a half-asleep daze. But somewhere around 10, I glanced out the window and saw the sky flashing with flickers of color, red, blue, green, all swirling like a quiet storm over the far end of town. That's when I remembered the Carnival had come back. It visited every few years, but something about it always felt off. Strange accidents, whispered rumors, odd disappearances. Nothing that ever made headlines, of course, but things people around town talked about just the same. The sky outside kept flashing, and somehow, without deciding it, I found myself putting on my shoes and grabbing my coat. It was as if the Carnival was calling me. I know how ridiculous that sounds, but that's exactly how it felt. With each step, I felt pulled, like a tether was tugging me gently, insistently toward those distant lights. The streets were empty as I walked, almost like everyone else in town knew better than to come outside tonight. The closer I got, the more surreal it all felt, like walking into a dream I'd only half remember when I woke up. When I finally reached the fairgrounds, I felt a prickle run down my spine. Something was wrong. The place was nearly deserted. No loud laughter, no music blaring from the rides, just the low hum of the distant Ferris wheel turning against the night sky, its creaking echoing across the empty field. The lights felt somehow muted, almost like I was looking at them through fogged glass. A shadow moved out of the corner of my eye, and I turned, half expecting to see a friend pulling a prank. Instead, I saw a man. He was tall, unnervingly thin, wearing a ragged suit and an old-fashioned top hat. His face was obscured by the shadows, but his eyes were sharp, almost glowing as they caught the dim light. He gave a small bow, his gaze locking onto mine in a way that made my skin crawl. He didn't speak. Instead, he tilted his head, gesturing toward something behind him. I followed his gaze and saw it, a ride at the very edge of the carnival grounds. It looked like one of those old, creaky funhouse rides on rails, with a single metal cart waiting at the start. It looked ancient, rust streaking its sides, the paint faded to barely a shadow of what it must have once been. The track wound through a small, darkened structure, half hidden by a patch of mist. Every logical part of me screamed to turn around, to go home, but I couldn't. My legs felt like they had a mind of their own, carrying me forward until I was standing right in front of the cart. The man gave another slight nod, as if to say, "Go on." Against all sense and reason, I climbed in, settling into the cold metal seat. The chills sank into my bones immediately, and before I knew it, the safety bar clicked down with a final, unyielding snap. There was no turning back. With a jolt, the cart lurched forward, the wheels grinding against the old rails. The sound filled the dark tunnel as we moved deeper into the shadowy funhouse. For the first few seconds, it was almost laughable. Faded plastic bats, cobwebs that looked like they'd been there for decades, the musty smell of forgotten things. But then the lights began to dim, flickering like dying candles. The air turned thick, musty, carrying a scent I couldn't quite place. Somewhere between old wood and something else. Something sickly and damp. The cart rattled around a bend, and that's when I saw them. Figures stood along the walls, motionless and eerie, draped in shadows. At first, I thought they were mannequins, cheap props, but then I noticed their eyes, open and glassy, staring blankly. My stomach twisted as I realized these weren't just random faces. I recognized some of them. They were people I'd seen around town, people who had disappeared over the years, swallowed up by whispered rumors and forgotten stories. One of them, a woman I recognized from my old job, stood just inches from the cart, her hand outstretched as if she'd been reaching for something. Or someone. I tried to scream, but the only sound was the grinding of the wheels as the cart rolled deeper into the darkness. The cart kept moving, deeper and deeper, dragging me further into the dark labyrinth of the ride. My pulse hammered in my ears, drowning out every other sound, even as a low, constant hum began to grow around me. It was as if the entire funhouse were alive, vibrating with a sinister energy. Every instinct told me to leap out, to claw my way free, but the safety bar pressed me firmly into the seat, cold and unyielding. There was no escape, not from this ride, and not from the figures watching from the shadows. Around each turn, more familiar faces emerged, lifeless and silent, frozen in strange, unnatural poses along the walls. Some seemed to reach out, hands stiff and hovering in the stale air. Others had their mouths open in silent screams, as though captured in the final moments of horror. I wanted to look away, to close my eyes and pretend this was some twisted prank, but their faces were impossible to ignore. The cart lurched again, picking up speed. The walls around me grew narrower, almost claustrophobic, as though they were slowly closing in, trapping me within. The air thickened, becoming almost syrupy, with a scent that was now unmistakable, the stench of decay. It clung to my throat, making it hard to breathe, each gulp of air bringing a wave of nausea. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, the faint sounds began to take shape, rising above the hum of the wheels. At first, they were whispers, delicate and fragile, just on the edge of hearing. But as the cart rounded another corner, they grew louder, a cacophony of voices all whispering in a strange, desperate unison. Their words tumbled over one another, blending into a haunting chant that filled the darkness. Help! Please! Trapped! Never leave! The voices echoed through the tunnel, filling my mind with a sickening dread. My heart raced as I tried to block them out, but they were everywhere, seeping into my thoughts. I gripped the edge of the cart, my fingers numb and shaking, as I strained to see through the darkness. There was no end in sight, only more twisted shadows, flickering lights, and those cold, hollow eyes staring at me. And then, as the cart slowed, something appeared beside me. A figure, faint and translucent, faded in and out of the murky darkness. It was a young man, maybe a few years older than me, with a face contorted in terror. He didn't move, didn't speak, but his eyes met mine, filled with a deep, desperate pleading. His mouth opened and closed as if he were screaming, yet no sound escaped. I tried to lean away to avert my gaze, but I couldn't look away from him. He looked so real, so vividly human, as though he were reaching out to me from beyond some invisible veil. I felt a chill run through my body as a sick realization dawned on me. He wasn't part of the ride. This wasn't some animatronic or cheap special effect. This was a spirit, trapped here, unable to leave, just like the others. The whispers grew louder, drowning out every thought, filling my head with a frantic, almost rhythmic chant. Desperation clawed at me, and I reached out, my hand trembling as I extended it toward him, unsure of what I was even trying to do. Maybe I thought I could help him somehow, pull him out of whatever hell he was trapped in. But the moment my hand drew close, he vanished, his hollow eyes lingering in the darkness for just a split second before dissolving completely. The cart jerked forward again, pulling me out of the moment, snapping me back into my own terrifying reality. The tunnel around me stretched on, seemingly endless, an oppressive maze of shadows and haunting eyes that refused to let me go. My throat tightened as I tried to scream, but my voice felt locked, as though the weight of this place had drained every ounce of strength from me. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed and helpless, as the cart rolled deeper and deeper into the darkness. But one thing was clear now, etched into my mind as clearly as the faces around me. This ride didn't just scare people. It took them, kept them, and I was starting to realize it might never let me go. The cart jerked around another corner, throwing me against the side. The sudden motion snapped me out of my daze, my mind racing as the horrible reality sank in. I was trapped on a ride that had somehow, impossibly, claimed the souls of those who entered. The strange urge I'd felt to come to the carnival, the eerie silence of the grounds, every warning I'd ignored now felt like a deliberate trick, bait to lure me here. A wave of anger and fear surged in me, and I grabbed the safety bar, pulling and pushing, desperately trying to free myself. But it wouldn't budge. As the cart slowed, my surroundings began to change. The tunnel opened up into a dark, cavernous room. This room was different from the others. It was vast, with shadows pooling like ink on every wall. At the center of the room stood a large, cracked mirror framed in tarnished silver, stretching from floor to ceiling. Its surface was smeared, cloudy, as though it hadn't been touched in years. Yet, it seemed to pulse, alive with some terrible energy. I stared at my reflection, expecting to see only my terrified face. But what I saw made my blood run cold. Behind me, in the reflection, was a crowd of figures. All the souls I had passed, the people I'd seen along the walls, frozen in their lifeless poses, were now clustered in the background, watching. Their faces were distorted, mouths stretched open in silent screams, eyes wide with terror. And at the very front of the crowd was the young man I'd seen moments before, his expression more desperate than ever, his hand reaching out as if he were begging me to understand something. Instinctively, I spun around, expecting to see them standing there in the room, but the space behind me was empty. It was only in the mirror, in that cursed glass, that they appeared, staring at me with such intensity that I felt trapped in their gaze. A low, hollow whisper filled the room, and I couldn't tell if it was coming from the mirror or from the shadows themselves. The voices had blended, merging into one ancient guttural sound, speaking words I couldn't fully understand. But fragments began to echo in my mind, each piece falling into place like an awful puzzle. Those who enter never leave. The whisper grew louder, and a flicker of movement in the mirror caught my eye. I saw myself in the reflection, but it was wrong. My reflection looked faded, as though I were slowly being erased. My skin was pallid, and my eyes took on the same hollow look I'd seen in the others. I felt a cold panic grip me, and I staggered back, but the reflection stayed in place, staring at me with a blank, almost resigned expression. I reached out, fingers trembling, touching the surface of the mirror, half expecting it to be solid and unyielding. But my fingers slipped through. The glass rippled, and for a second I felt a bone-chilling cold sweep through me, as though I were being pulled into the depths of icy water. I yanked my hand back, gasping, and watched in horror as the ripple expanded, distorting the faces of the souls trapped within. They began to swirl, blending into one another, their forms blurring and twisting until they were nothing but shadows swirling within the glass. I could feel the mirror pulling at me, like an invisible thread winding itself around my wrists and ankles, tugging me forward. Panic flooded my mind as I realized what was happening. The ride wasn't just showing me the trapped souls. It wanted to add me to them, to pull me into that eternal prison. With every ounce of willpower, I turned, wrenching myself away from the mirror, fighting the strange pull that seemed to be drawing me back. My heart pounded as I pushed against the safety bar again, this time with a frenzied desperation. And then, just when I thought all was lost, it gave way with a snap, releasing me. I scrambled out of the cart, stumbling to the cold, hard ground, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispers faded, replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence. I glanced back at the mirror, which now stood still, its surface flat and lifeless once more. But I could feel them, the trapped souls, watching me from somewhere beyond the glass, their presence lingering in the air, a silent, haunting reminder. I didn't wait another second. I turned and ran, tearing through the dark room and down the tunnel, feeling the walls seem to close in behind me as I fled. I ran, my footsteps echoing in the suffocating silence, feeling as though the shadows themselves were reaching for me, trying to pull me back. The path through the funhouse twisted and turned in impossible ways, each corner leading only to another stretch of darkness. My breaths were ragged, every inhale thick with the stench of rot, pressing on my lungs as I struggled to push forward. Somewhere behind me, I thought I heard faint footsteps, the quiet patter of someone or something following. Each step grew heavier, as though the darkness itself had weight, dragging me down. The walls seemed to press in, squeezing the air out of the narrow passage, and with each twist of the path, my sense of direction faded. I didn't know which way led to the exit anymore, or if there even was one. For a brief, horrible moment, I wondered if the ride was reshaping itself, trapping me in an endless loop, until I too would become just another face on the wall, another soul bound to this cursed place. But then I saw it, just up ahead, a thin line of light cutting through the darkness. My heart leapt, hope flaring to life as I stumbled toward it. The line grew, widening as I approached, until I could make out the faint outline of an arched doorway. Beyond it, the carnival lights glowed softly, flickering through the mist as if nothing were wrong, as if none of the horrors inside this ride existed. I reached the doorway and burst through it, stumbling out into the open air, gasping as the cold night hit my skin. The lights of the carnival stretched before me, blinking in an endless rhythm, almost comforting in their familiarity. I stopped for a moment, taking in the normalcy of the outside world, grounding myself in the sight of the Ferris wheel turning slowly against the night sky, the quiet hum of generators filling the air. Everything looked as it had before, as though the nightmare I'd just escaped was nothing but an illusion. But then I felt it, a chill prickling the back of my neck, an icy finger tracing down my spine. I looked over my shoulder, back at the entrance of the funhouse ride, expecting to see only the empty doorway. But instead, there was the man, the one with the tattered suit and piercing eyes. He stood at the edge of the shadows, half hidden by the mist, his gaze fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. He didn't move, didn't speak, but his presence alone filled me with a sense of dread so profound, it was hard to breathe. Somehow I knew he wasn't just part of the carnival. He was part of the ride, its keeper, its guardian. He was the one who had drawn me in, who had guided me toward the cart, knowing full well what lay inside. And as he watched me, his head tilted just slightly, his expression unreadable, I felt a deep, undeniable truth settle over me. I had escaped, yes, but I was not free. In that gaze, I understood it all. The ride had let me go, but it had left something inside me, an imprint, a mark. I could feel it, faint but undeniable, like a ghostly residue clinging to my skin, cold and unshakable. I knew that somehow a part of me was still bound to that ride, still caught in its shadow, like an invisible tether pulling me back to it. With a final nod, the man turned, fading into the mist as though he were nothing but a figment of the fog itself. The doorway to the ride stood empty again, silent and foreboding, as though waiting for its next victim. I stumbled backward, tearing my gaze away, and forced myself to walk toward the carnival exit. The lights flickered dimly overhead, casting long, eerie shadows across the deserted fairground. The laughter and music I had expected were nowhere to be found. It was silent now, as if the carnival had gone to sleep, its games and attractions lying in wait for the next unfortunate soul who would stumble into its trap. I reached the edge of the fairground, the exit gate looming in front of me. But just as I crossed through it, a single chilling whisper echoed in my mind. Those who enter never truly leave. The lights of the carnival dimmed behind me as I walked away, disappearing into the mist. Though I couldn't see it, I felt its presence, watching me, waiting. I walked away from the carnival, trying to shake off the thick, eerie sensation clinging to me like a shadow. Each step felt heavier, as if something unseen held onto me, slowing me down. The street was empty, blanketed in a deep, unsettling silence. Even the sounds of distant cars and the city lights seemed dulled, like the world itself had faded, leaving me in a strange, isolated twilight. When I finally reached my apartment, the sense of relief was fleeting. My skin still felt prickly, and my heart hadn't slowed since I'd left the carnival grounds. Inside, I flipped on every light, as if the brightness alone could banish the feeling of being watched. I poured myself a glass of water, hands shaking, my mind replaying each moment of that haunted ride. The faces, the whispers, the reflection in the mirror that had almost pulled me in. It felt like a memory that wouldn't settle, flickering in my mind, refusing to fade. Hours slipped by in restless, fitful sleep. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw them. Those empty, staring faces. A jolt awake, drenched in cold sweat. The whispers from the funhouse echoing in my head, relentless and haunting. Those who enter never leave. The next morning I was exhausted, but something compelled me to look up the history of the carnival. I scoured local news sites and old archives, trying to make sense of what had happened, hoping to find some explanation that would make this all feel like a nightmare. And that's when I found it. A string of strange disappearances tied to the carnival, each incident oddly similar. Local papers mentioned missing persons who were last seen heading toward the carnival, but there was never any trace of them afterward. No leads or explanations. They'd simply vanished. One article, dated almost 2 decades ago, caught my eye. It described an old attraction known as the Lost Souls Ride. According to the piece, the funhouse on rails had been part of the carnival for years, though it was removed after a series of unexplained incidents. Several riders had gone missing during its run, and although the carnival management claimed it was just a ride, rumors persisted that the attraction was haunted, or worse, cursed. After multiple reports of people disappearing inside, the ride was quietly dismantled and supposedly put into storage. Yet here it was again, somehow resurrected. The room seemed to close in around me as I read the last few lines of the article. One sentence stood out, sending an icy shock through my veins. Those who returned from the ride reported strange dreams, feelings of being watched, and an unshakable urge to revisit the carnival, almost as if the ride itself were calling them back. A chill crept over me as I realized that was exactly what I'd been feeling. A pull, a quiet whisper at the back of my mind, urging me to return, to go back to the carnival grounds. I tried to push it away, rationalize it as leftover fear, but the sensation wouldn't fade. I could feel it, like a weight deep in my chest, an anchor tying me to that cursed place. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the urge. It was subtle, growing louder in the quiet moments, the suggestions slipping into my thoughts whenever I let my guard down. Days passed, and the pull only grew stronger. It was inescapable, like a magnetic force drawing me back to that dark place. The carnival's lights lingered in my memory, flickering like a beacon, and every night, just on the edge of sleep, I'd see the man in the tattered top hat, his piercing gaze fixed on me, waiting. I knew, in some awful, undeniable way, that he was calling me, watching my every move. Finally, one night, I couldn't resist any longer. I left my apartment, hardly aware of my own actions, my feet carrying me as if possessed. The streets were empty, silent, the city asleep as I made my way back to the fairground. I arrived to find the carnival lights dimly flickering in the mist, just as they had on that first night. It was as if it had never closed, as if it had always been waiting for me. I took a shaky breath and stepped forward past the entrance onto the grounds. The mist swallowed me whole, the familiar smell of stale popcorn and cold metal filling the air. The old funhouse ride waited at the far edge, silent and ominous, the lone cart ready, as if it had known I'd return. And standing beside it, like a ghostly sentinel, was the man in the top hat. He met my gaze, his eyes glinting in the dim light, and gave a slow, knowing nod. The whispers filled my ears again, wrapping around me like a shroud. Those who enter never leave. And with a sinking dread, I realized that the ride hadn't just claimed my soul. It had made me its newest prisoner, bound to its pull, forever returning, again and again, to the haunted carnival ride.
Just feel the movement kind of